Good morning. You're watching a special broadcast of Business World Live. I'm Jess De Los Santos. Good morning. You're watching a special broadcast of Business World Live. I'm Jess De Los Santos. It's 10:30 a.m. this Monday in Manila, and let's go straight to our top story. Filipinos may soon need to shell out more money for their favorite chichirya. A report by a state think tank says lawmakers may move to impose taxes on junk foods. The National Tax Research Institute, or NTRC, says the government may look into the possibility of charging 10 to 20% excise tax on junk foods. The agency says this could discourage the habit of eating foods detrimental to the body while generating fresh revenues for the government. The search for revenue to pay for the COVID-19 containment effort could revive stalled initiatives to tax junk foods after congressional opposition derailed efforts in 2019. Now, should a 20% tax be imposed, the government may collect an average of nearly 73 billion pesos each year from 2020 to 2024. At 15%, the average will hit almost 55 billion pesos, and at 10%, the average will be 36 billion pesos. The NTRC based the figures on the projected gross income of manufacturers of snack products and fast food chains and an annual growth assumption of 8.5%. But NTRC said classifying products as junk food may pose difficulties as some accessible and affordable products are considered staple by millions of Filipino families. The agency is specifically pointing out to the concerns of few lawmakers about plans to salty foods such as dried fish and instant noodles. Meanwhile, Finance Chief Sonny Dominguez said the executive is now carefully studying the proposal of House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Albay Representative Joey Salceda to impose a value-added tax or VAT on the digital economy. Dominguez said the DOF is now preparing to discuss with Congress the complexities that could come with slapping taxes on digital transactions and streaming sites such as Netflix and Spotify. Salceda's bill is estimated to yield as much as 29.1 billion pesos in additional revenues, which can be used by the government in its coronavirus containment measures. Now, we are on a shortened trading week due to the observance of Eid al-Fitr, but just as it is, it might actually be a much needed reprieve here for the local index after we saw the PSEI ending last week in the red. You have the index snapping the 3-day gain that we saw last week, ending Friday down 1.2% to 5,539. And according to Claire of Phil Stocks, that might actually just be all profit taking in anticipation again of the long weekend, according to Alviar as well. That 71% plunge that we saw in a pledged inflows as reported by the Board of Investments in the first 4 months of 2020 has actually weakened or pulled down investor sentiments. Again, foreign pledges for the first 4 months of the year is down to 84.1 billion pesos, coming from the 286.7 billion base from the first 4 months of 2019. According to Alviar, this means that we can't expect much additional help from foreign investments to actually help spur further economic activity, and that ultimately is going to translate to tougher means really to reopen the economy. Now, PNB Securities' President Manny Lisbona is saying that the markets had been consolidating for almost a month now due to lack of fresh catalysts. Selling pressure from foreign investors, however, have somehow eased. According to him, daily average selling is now down to 200 million pesos compared to the 723 million pesos that was recorded for the month of April. Nonetheless, you have year-to-date foreign players selling as much as $1.2 billion of local shares. However, we also saw that soaring on Friday. Net foreign selling was up 6 times to 742.1 million pesos compared to the 121 million pesos that we saw on Thursday. Also, the index, however, somehow inching lower as well, albeit insignificantly over the past week here. It was down 0.05% here. And according to Chris Mangan of AAA Securities, that's really due to extremely low trading volumes, with most investors taking the sidelines. He is, in fact, also saying that it's seeing sideways trading persisting this week. But let's, for now, again, like what I mentioned earlier, it's a shortened trading week for the local bourse. For now, let's try to take a look at specific stocks here. Let's kick off with one particular would-be stock in the consumer space that's braving this turbulent market here. I'm talking about Mary Mart. They are going to push through with their public listing. They are offering 1.6 billion peso shares priced at 1 peso a piece. They are targeting to go public on June 15. They are in fact behind by 2 months from their original schedule, which was supposed to be they were supposed to go public on April 2, but since of course Luzon went on an enhanced community quarantine, they had to push back their plans. Now, according to them as well, the proceeds from the public offering will go to store network and expansion. In fact, they have in the pipeline 12 stores at least by the second quarter. According to Bea Lopez of Regina Capital, there might actually be some robust investor appetite for Mary Mart here, especially with shares in retail firms like Pure Gold and Robinson's Retail surviving the turbulence so far, in expectation that businesses, businesses from the consumer space will actually benefit from Pinoy stocking up on supplies. Expectation, according to Bea Lopez, is that the same might actually happen for Mary Mart. But it's not the same scenario here for one of our food retail giants here. I'm talking about our favorite Jollibee on a shakeup this time around. In fact, they are allocating 7 billion pesos for business transformation. According to them, they are going to rationalize non-performing stores. They're going to have a look over their store network that might, in fact, also rationalize supply chain facilities and management and their support group structure. According to Jollibee, they're not expecting consumers to revert quickly to pre-COVID behavior, meaning, according to their CEO, Ernesto Tan Machong, they are expecting consumer behavior to change. So what does this mean? This might actually mean that they are going to dig deeper into digital commerce and technology, and at the same time, increase their capacity for delivery to home and offices. At the same time, their takeout and drive-through transactions. There's also the probability that they might venture into installing mobile applications and eventually foray into cloud kitchen, which means they are going to have unmarked delivery outlets with no dine-in facilities located in discrete and low rent sites. Ultimately, it's a rationalization of restaurants' resources and productions, as well as changes in support and management groups. However, that bit of news there from Jollibee, and not something that investors are cheering. We did see Jollibee slumping by as much as 2.6% on a Friday, as you can see in this chart right here. But Jollibee pretty much on a decline for the most part of last week. Let's see how they are going to fare when trading resumes tomorrow. Now, from Jollibee, let's move on to TAN's Macro Asia. This time around, they are bidding for time when it comes to their submission of documents for the Sangli Airport. Macro Asia is saying that together with their partner China Communications Construction, they are asking for time to submit post-qualification requirements for the $10 billion Sangli International Airport, which is originally due on June 11th. That is according to Cavite Governor John Vic Remulla. Now, should this be granted, this will already be the second extension for Macro Asia. According to Remulla, the situation is understandable at this stage, and that they are going to study the request handed out by Macro Asia, and that they are expected to give their answer in a few days. The Cavite LGU is hoping to break ground the first phase of the project by the second quarter, and they are in fact hoping that the airport will be fully operational by 2023. Power producers are seeking a reprieve in fulfilling certain obligations in supply contracts, as well as the removal of some charges that are passed on to consumers. Strict quarantine measures are hurting both ends of the energy supply chain. The Philippine Independent Power Producers Association says they also need the same flexibility in payments that they gave power distributors purchasing power from their plants. PIPA explains that they continue to pay their fixed costs despite falling revenues due to the deferment of payments during the lockdown. Otherwise, the group warned that some power plants might not survive. Power utilities in the countryside are also asking the government to lift generation charges that are still being passed on to consumers during this quarantine period. Contract capacity charges, capital recovery fees, and minimum energy offtake fees are just some of the main reasons we're seeing higher power bills during this time. The quarantine measures imposed to curb the spread of the virus are affecting people's physical and mental health. Linda Varona, Lifestyle Medicine Department Head of the Adventist Medical Center, says the quarantine is fostering bad eating habits. Some are forced to eat noodles instead of fruits in the interest of saving money. Even health frontliners are relying on food delivered or donated to them. Meanwhile, the United Nations is sounding an alarm over the impact of stay-at-home policies on people's mental health. The UN says there's a looming mental illness crisis as millions of people globally are surrounded by death and disease while being forced into isolation, anxiety, and poverty. Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged the international community to do more to protect those facing heightened mental pressures. The Treasury Bureau says the national government extended almost 26 billion pesos worth of budgetary support to GOCCs in March. That's a 347% jump on subsidies to state-owned firms year on year. The National Electrification Agency and the LRT administration received the bulk of the budget, with the NEA being given over 11 billion pesos after receiving nothing in March 2019. The LRTA took more than 10 billion pesos against the 5 million pesos it received in the same period last year. On the other hand, the National Irrigation Administration received only 2.9 billion pesos, which is 18% less than what they got last year. Also receiving subsidies were the Philippine Fisheries Development Authority, the National Housing Authority, the Small Business Corporation, and the Philippine Heart Center. This means that the national government has extended a total of over 36 billion pesos worth of subsidies to GOCCs in the first quarter of the year. These are granted to cover operational expenses not covered by state firm revenues. With various degrees of lockdowns being implemented across the world, many are forced to face what is now commonly touted as a new normal, including doing things remotely, whether it be for work, business, and even school. But not everyone is transitioning well to this new mode of doing things. Now, to help us get by, let's get insights from communications firm Priority Consultants with their Chief Executive Kunalan Chakravarthy. We'll speak to him via StreamYard from Singapore. Good morning, Kunalan. Great to have you here with us on the show. First things first, probability, Kunalan, that companies will really be forced to rethink ways on how they do things beyond the pandemic. Will remote working be the new norm post-COVID-19?
Good morning, Jessica. Thank you for having me. Yes, to answer your question, I think the new normal is going to be in a hybrid model. I think the social distancing is here to stay. I think we are going to be having to deal with people who are virtual. Workforce is going to be virtual as well as physical. So how do we actually make this a reality? How do we actually get the productivity and the value that we get from human face-to-face physical interaction? So that is going to be a challenge always. So that this is where I think the leadership comes into play, and the teams that are being led by managers who have the empathy, who have an understanding of how people might feel where they are not facing people face to face. I just saw an earlier report that you talked about where there's a report about people facing mental health in this as a result of the lockdown. And this is a serious problem. This is actually an unseen danger that many people actually have. you've been going to work for years, 15 years, 16 years, 5 years even. Suddenly you're not going to work anymore. You're working from home. You do not even have a desk. You do not even have an environment where you can sit down and do your thing like you did at the office, for example. Some of our colleagues are missing their own colleagues at lunch, for example. It was a social interaction that was more important when you're going to work, right? So I think to say that, this new normal is going to go back to somewhat like it was pre-COVID-19, and yes, eventually it will all die down, I think it's a fallacy. I think we have to, at least for the next 6 months to 9 months, we are going to look at a hybrid model, hybrid workforce model, where we are going to have some people in the office, that others are not going to be in the office. How do we have virtual meetings and physical meetings at the same time? This is going to be a challenge for most workforces.
But how do you make a balance in that hybrid setup? How do you determine which set of workers you're going to require to actually be physically present in the office compared to those which can actually do their work from home?
Yeah. So the good thing is, if you have an office environment, you don't really need everybody in the office. But when you have a physical factory environment and an office environment, that is when it becomes a little bit difficult. When you have field service engineers and technicians on the ground who need to have a morning meeting to make sure that they are in sync with what needs to happen for the day or for the week, that's when it becomes a little bit challenging. So do we get the admin managers in the office at the same time as these guys and then expose everybody to potential danger of COVID? How do we manage that? So this is where staggered teams, where you have to think about who is best served by being in the office, doing the work, and who is best served by being able to connect with the remote working capabilities that we are doing right now. The other thing to think about as well is where you have someone who's perpetually virtual, they need a break as well. They need to be able to come in and meet people and to have interaction. So if it's a case of scheduling people at different times, different schedules, different capabilities, even for that matter, younger staff may need a little bit more supervision. They might need a little bit more discipline to come into the office, for example, and be able to do that. Even places like Jakarta, Manila, Kuala Lumpur, Thailand, the commute is difficult as well for a lot of people. So that, reducing that and making sure that they're productive, not actually having to spend 2-3 hours in a commute and being awfully tired at the end of the exercise and not being productive is also a waste of effort and energy. So recognizing that, I think managers and leaders need to look at that and say, let's think about a system that actually benefits everybody. Productivity gains are high. And the mental stress is lower as well. So those who have been at home for a long time, give them a break, get them at work, and so on and so forth. This matter of just scheduling that, I think. The most important thing, the takeaway I want to give you here, Jess, is as much as possible, let's apply a little bit of empathy in dealing with our people, right? If we understand how people might feel at any one point in time, having the conversations, interaction back and forth, that would help them tremendously.
But you see, nonetheless, you have the hybrid model actually still requiring good connection here. And sad to say, not all wireless users are created equal. For one, the Philippines still pretty much a laggard compared to our neighbors when it comes to connectivity. How can organizations actually work around that? Or is it a case of go digital or go bust?
It is not a case of go digital or bust. I know the provinces, for example, some of our own staff are struggling with connectivity issues. And today, courtesy of everybody working from home, the bandwidth demands on the consumer networks is so significant that they can't support. But having said that, as I said, if we can just schedule different people to come into the office where the bandwidth is more robust, or alternatively, we look at remote working facilities that may be available nearby within the shorter commute for many of our people, so that they can get into an environment that is a little bit more business-like, the infrastructure is solid, they are able to perform at the optimum and feel comfortable. People, when they walk into an office, they put on the game face and start working, right? Eventually, that happens, right? So that element of it is important. So it's not a case of digital or bust. I think there are different ways of thinking about it. The other thing also is I find that companies are not using cloud applications well enough today. We have a population that is mobile first, a population that is very savvy with mobile applications for consumer users. but there are enough enterprise applications on mobile platforms as well as cloud platforms that can actually increase productivity for a lot of organizations. And we as an organization, we are very much focused on applications, using cloud applications to make sure that we are in sync, we are communicating on a regular basis. I have this saying in the office, our office is very quiet because the internet, the online communications are so noisy. We are talking back and forth and there's a lot of chatter. And that's the way it is today. And that connects people from remote places, a hybrid workforce, and make sure that the conversations are going.
Available. How do you try to make some organizations actually adopt to those technological changes here? Especially we're talking about rural areas here, like in the Philippines.
Sorry, you just got cut off a little bit. Say that again. I didn't catch that part.
Okay, so I know there are cloud devices, cloud applications that are available. However, how do you try to convince organizations, especially those in the rural areas, to actually adapt to these changes?
Yeah,
and that require some funding as well.
Yeah, no, it does. It absolutely does. And it is tremendously helpful. I've seen in countries like, we have offices in Jakarta, we have offices in Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, and India. And we see where the local governments or the state governments actually have supported SMEs, especially the mom and pop shops, to go digital, right? And it is a simple case of teaching people how to use simple applications like instant messaging, like inventory, and so on and so forth, and general ledger and so on. So basic things like that needs to be. I think the government support is critical, but at the same time, as I said, even the mom and pop shops, they have smartphones today. They use smartphones. They use WhatsApp or Line or Viber, whatever it may be, right, across the region. So they are already using some elements of the application world. So it's a matter of just helping them just make that transition a little bit more. But it is an effort that requires a community. It requires the public sector, especially the government agencies. It requires the private sector to come in and play a part together. But ultimately, if the leaders of the organization do not see the value and they remain steadfast in their traditional ways of doing business, it is a case of whether you adapt or you don't survive. You choose. So they have to learn to participate.
Okay. Now, do you think that a hybrid model rather of a work setup will somehow ease fears of corporate fraud and corruption, especially since somehow there's going to be more supervision as compared to a completely work from home setup?
Sure. Okay. So two things here: fraud and supervision, or more supervision, is two different things, right? So we are not advocating more supervision, and that's not the point. I think remote working is going to bring a lot of trust to people. And remember this, our assets for any organization are the people. If we treat them right, I was surprised by the number of leaders I had in our organization the minute COVID happened across the region. People started taking up the leadership roles, coming up with reasons and support, and camaraderie was superb. And that powered me to go forward to make sure that we and my leadership team were able to do what we needed to do to make sure that we were healthy and secure and our people were safe, right? So it's not about extra supervision. It is not about watching people every minute of the day. It is actually giving them the trust, building the framework to say, these are the objectives. This is what we need to achieve. Be transparent with your people. Let's be clear, guys. This is a challenge that is unprecedented. We will come through this, but this is the plan. At any point in time, you need to have some modification. So that's the most important thing, right? So that is why communications is supremely important. And this is why I'm saying, even if it's WhatsApp, Line, or Viber, communicate with your people. So it's not about extra supervision. It is not about managing people every minute of the day. It is actually getting them to understand that this is a collective exercise. We need to all work together. Not necessarily harder, but just need to work together to ensure that we are successful. That's the first thing. Is it going to decrease fraud? To be honest, if fraud I think is going to increase because of the digital nature of the business as we go on digital. But again, if you build the principles on the openness, transparency, and the fact that you expect people to do the right thing, and people in the Philippines, people in Southeast Asia generally have done the right thing. mostly across the board. And that's been the most surprising thing about human nature, I have to admit, right? And
Yeah.
and so as they do that, people do that, I think fraud will be seen for what it is, and we will pick up. And that's something that fraud happens in any case, but because more people are going online, there needs to be an education for people to say this is fraud and this is not. And how do I not get scammed? That is the other thing that we need to think about. That's education at the end of the day, ultimately.
Well, if you're saying that fraud somehow is going to be inevitable given the current work setups here, how do you think then organizations can help enhance security and data management?
Yeah. So the first and foremost thing, I think it is about education. I think a lot of our users, you can have every sort of application in there, all sorts of technology and cybersecurity, firewalls and so on and so forth. But if you do not have the education, if people do not understand that they cannot download things, they cannot give away information so easily to people that they don't know, they've never met, they've not trusted, they don't even have connections with, or even even if it's a friend who's asking for things, there are certain protocols. It's being understanding what is the data integrity is important. Being able to understand how data should be treated, information should be treated is super critical. And this is across the board. Whether you are a junior person, whether you're a very senior person, you can't keep doing the things that you've been doing all along. You need to change. You need to be able to understand that today you need to deal with data differently. And that's an education issue. Again, going back to my point, leaders in organizations, the public sector agencies, private sector community, everybody needs to participate in this together and help educate.
All right, definitely in a new normal, a lot of changes and developments and adjustments that organizations need to make. Thank you for your insights, Kunalan Chakravarthy,
Thank you so much.
Executive of Priority Consultants.
Thank you so much.
We're going to pause for a quick break. This is where live will return to the here on One News. Like we said at the start of the show, it's a shortened trading week here for the local bourse with observance of a deal occur. But for now, let's try to take a look at how major Asian indices are performing at the start of the week. As you can see here, you have a major Asian stocks following gains seen in U.S. equity futures here. These are traders are seeing a better glimpse into economies reopening worldwide with infection rates as well slowly tempering in some nations, somehow really offsetting the increasing renewed tensions between the US and China. First, let's try to take a look at Japan equities here. As you can see, the topics is up 1.3%. The Nikkei likewise is in the green, up 1.5%. In Japan, of course, developments, you have the government now expecting to lift a state of emergency in Tokyo and surrounding prefectures starting today. Now, also, let's try to take a look at what's happening here in Korea. Korean indices here, as you can see, the Kospi is now up 0.5%. Now, over in Australia, they are up as well in the green, inching higher, 1.3%. In Australia, you now have school children finally returning back to schools here. But what we really have to monitor here would have to be Hong Kong. The Hang Seng, as you can see here, is down 1.3%. In fact, that fell as much as 5.6% on Friday. This as police clashes with protesters ensued after demonstrations against China's move to crack down on dissent. That is adding pressure, really souring relations between the U.S. and China. You have a Chinese foreign minister saying the U.S. should in fact give up on its wishful thinking of changing China, and that American leaders are potentially opening doors to a new Cold War. Let's see, however, if the gains that we're seeing here in most Asian markets is going to carry over in the local bourse once trading resumes tomorrow. And that's the special edition of Business World this Monday, May 25th, 2020, in Mubarak to our Muslim brothers and sisters. Catch us again tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. I'm Jess de los Santos, Year One News.